When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about, I think, one of the biggest reasons why Winds of Winter has yet to come out, and something that is preventing George R.R. Martin from progressing and releasing Winds of Winter. I've talked about this in a lot of videos. I've talked about the timing, right, where it's so many plots going on. How do you get one character here and all of the characters built up into this one plot? He has so many subplots going on. Well, this is the one thing for me that I believe is kind of holding back the entire process. And that process is going to be Daenerys. But before we talk about my reasoning and why I believe that is, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow to people that might like this content as well. Also, thank you guys for getting us to YouTube partnership. So I'll show the YouTube shirt, I guess. But yeah, so thank you guys for all the support. Last week, the channel did really well, viewer-wise, subscribers, all that stuff. So I just want to give a massive shout-out to you guys. But let's get into the video. I think the biggest thing, if we look at it from, even if we look at the show, right? Because the show was a place where I felt like characters went to die when they met Daenerys. Not as in their characters actually died, but they became less interesting when they went to Daenerys. And the reason that is because there's so many characters with Daenerys that it's hard to give each individual character screen time or, I guess, book time. And that's kind of the case for me with Daenerys. And Daenerys, at this point, has so much going on. Because we know for a fact Daenerys has to be at the very least, sailing to Westeros by the end of Winds of Winter. So this was kind of the whole idea with Season 6. Season 6, the end, the final shot is Daenerys sailing to Westeros. But think about how quickly her plot had to move and how quickly things had to be wrapped up to get to that point, right? So the beginning of Season 6, very similar to the way Winds of Winter is going to start, Daenerys is caught by the Dothraki. But look how quickly she gets out of that situation, then immediately has to march back. We have one little battle scene in Meereen. She has this one little conversation with Dario, and she's out of there, right? Daenerys, even in the show, is one of the big three, just like in the books, right? And even in the show where she had some of the most screen time, it still felt rushed, right? Everything with Daenerys felt rushed, especially with the concluding of the Meereen plot. So let's now look at the books on everything that has to be concluded by the end of Winds of Winter for her character to make sense. She has to, one, deal with everything with the Dothraki, right? And this is assuming that she's going to put them together into one Khalasar, similar to the way she did in the show. Now, I don't know about you, but George R.R. Martin is someone that likes to be very articulate and someone that likes to go into detail about how these things happen. He doesn't have much time to do that, right? Because like I said, not only does Daenerys have to actually get back to Meereen and then either set sail or she goes to some other city and invades that and then takes the ships there, or maybe she goes to Victarion. There's so many questions with Daenerys' character, right? Because for it to possibly make sense, Daenerys needs to be at least out of the control of the Dothraki, or like the leader of the Dothraki, by at least the midpoint of Winds of Winter. I don't know why I can't speak. So when you look at it from that point of view, you're like, okay, that is a lot to process, right? So she not only has to be introduced to all these Dothraki leaders, or whatever's going there. I think what happened in the show is probably a decent way that's going to happen in the books, but it just is going to be done a lot better for me. So how she just burns all the cows probably will happen in a lot different of a way. So to me, I think the problem is going to be how quickly can George just get rid of that plot or just, get through it really quickly with it making sense. Now, that is something that's incredibly difficult to do as already. Now, the next part comes with, okay, so the Battle of Meereen, right? How is that going to go? Because in the show, Daenerys was there to kind of bail them out. The dragons were there, and she ends up getting there, reasonably on time to help. The books, that doesn't seem like the case, unless the first Battle of Meereen, where it's kind of a stalemate, And I am someone that really doesn't think Barristan should die in the books. I think he has a lot more value being alive and being this much more emotional death when Daenerys does eventually come back. Because Barristan dying without his queen or Dany even being there, to me, feels like a disservice to his character. I'm just not a big fan of that idea. I think Barristan, and especially we've gotten hints that maybe George wants to go the route of Mad Queen Daenerys, which at this point I really don't even want to see anymore. It was something I kind of thought would be cool in the show, but it was done so poorly that I don't even want to see it in the books anymore. But I think if he wants to do that, keeping Barristan alive and having a much more impactful death with Daenerys, maybe witnessing it or something, makes a lot more sense to me. And the whole idea with Daenerys is there's so many characters right now. There's so many characters in Meereen. With Tyrion, Victarion, Jorah's back, Barristan, like we talked about, the entire Hisdar plot. We have the Green Grace, the Sons of the Harpy, everything with the siege of Meereen going on, which I'm assuming is not going to be settled like right away. There's a lot going on, and that's my problem. Is George has so many POV characters in a Meereen right now, right? There's so much going on there that it's hard for me to look at Winds of Winter and see where is he going to fit this all in, because it feels like you could do almost the entire book on just Meereen. And then the even bigger problem is he has to have Daenerys leaving Meereen, going to Westeros, or maybe the last chapter is her landing on Dragonstone. That has to happen. Okay? Because we cannot start out the last book and Daenerys is still fucking around in Essos. It just can't happen. So when you look at a lot of these other plot lines, right, why I'm saying Daenerys is the big one is because look at most of our characters are at least in Westeros. A character like Arya is kind of the outlier to that, but the thing is, Arya is one person, right? She is going to have her Faceless Men stuff, and most likely she's going to find her way back to Westeros one way or another. If you want to check out more of my in-depths, I'd look at my Arya videos. But she is one character. Daenerys not only has to mobilize an entire army of, let's say, Dothraki, Unsullied, let's say the Ironborn forces that Victarion maybe gives her, or maybe she takes them, whatever. How is she going to leave the governs of Meereen and Slaver's Bay as a whole? There's so much going on there, and we've seen George very much does not like the idea of teleporting armies, right? Armies take a long time to mobilize and get from one place to another. We see this with Stannis. We have like 3 chapters of Stannis just marching from point A to point B. So, I mean, that's going to be a problem, I think, for George, and I think he really is struggling with that. Because other plot lines, like any plot lines in the Riverlands or in the Vale, like Sansa or the North, you know where it's going to go, right? And George has a bigger idea where he can get all of these characters in the Riverlands. It's the main hub of Westeros. We've seen this throughout all of the books. It's not too hard to get all those characters to eventually make it to the the Riverlands, right? But how the hell are you going to get Daenerys there? And that's the problem. And with all the other POV characters that George has, he doesn't have as many chapters as maybe a Dance with Dragons to get Daenerys to Westeros. And that to me is the biggest problem. Now let's even get away from her plot. The dragons. I have been rereading Fire and Blood because I eventually want to do a review for you guys before we get into kind of House of the Dragon, and that starts taking up a bunch of my time. And the Rings of Power. So, if you Lord of the Rings fans, I will be reviewing the show. I don't have very high expectations for it, but I will be reviewing it all the same. Fire and Blood, right? The entire first 50 to 60 pages is set to establish how massively overpowered the dragons are. Like, the dragons is what conquers Westeros. Like, yes, Aegon is smart, Visenya is a great, fighter and all that, and Rhaenys as well, great flyer of her dragon, but the dragons are what conquers Westeros. and it literally took all 7 kingdoms to even bring down one, right? And that's the thing, is like, it was just Dorne that was able to do it. So how is George going to get rid of these 3 dragons? Daenerys just cannot have 3 dragons, right? Because the problem is, and this is something, again, the show faced, that they struggled with the dragons. How do we go about the dragons? Now, they created a lot of dumb scenarios to get rid of the dragons, right? So we have Viserion getting randomly killed beyond the wall, which for no reason doesn't make any sense, right? Because the sole reason of that was to knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. 1, we need to nerf Daenerys. She can't have as many dragons. 2, to help the White Walkers get past the wall, right? So I think you're looking at it, and that's why I believe Dragonbinder will probably be used at some point. Because Daenerys just can't have 3 dragons. It eliminates any suspense, because if we're going off of past history that George has written, it's nearly impossible to defeat the dragons, unless you're Dorne, and you have really good scorpions, and you're good at aiming, and you're good at using their tactics, right? Because no other kingdom is going to have happen with the Dornish. The Dornish all but destroy their entire region just to suppress bending the knee to Aegon. Other kingdoms don't have that ability, and they're not going to be able to hide as easily. So the question becomes, how does George nerf down Daenerys a bit, right? Because Daenerys comes over with this huge Dothraki army, these army of Unsullied, maybe some sellswords, maybe she leaves them over in Meereen, who knows? She has Tyrion, one of the smartest dudes in the entire book series. She's got a great naval commander in Victarion. It's not going to be a fight. She's just going to roll over Aegon. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what George wants to happen. To me, it doesn't seem like George's style, right? Like, Renly was someone that was majorly overpowered and had the largest army by far, and he's the one that gets wiped out. Because that's not the way George wants it. George wants it to be more of an equal ground where people's decisions matter and they end up dying because of it. And that can't happen if Daenerys has 3 of her dragons. It's just not going to happen, right? And that's, again, another issue the show faced was, well, Daenerys has 3 dragons. Why isn't she using them? Which then makes Tyrion look like an idiot, because we have to have somebody making the plans that are going to make it seem like it's a fair fight, when in reality it's just not. That also gets to the point where Rhaegal was just sniped randomly by Euron. Don't even get me started. But that is my thing, where if you look at a lot of the things we saw on the show, that you can tell the writers struggled to figure out what to do with these things, I think is the same thing George is struggling with. Because if we look at how the dragons were killed before, right? The dragons were killed because of other dragons. They were very rarely killed because of other things, right? In instances you have in the Dance with Dragons, the kind of raiding of the dragon pits, where, again, the dragons were kind of chained up in an enclosed, like, space, and there were, like, thousands of people, and even tons of people died. That's never going to really be a case or scenario in the normal story. Aegon's conquest, you had the Dornish, who, again, it's almost lucky, because think there were so many raids that were done on the Dornish, right? Like, there were hundreds of raids done by Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys before they actually killed one, and that's just one. Like, even after Rhaenys died and her dragon died, Visenya and Aegon continued to pour it on even more violently, and they still couldn't kill them. So when you look at all these things, it's like, it almost makes sense that Euron is going to get a dragon to then kill another one of Daenerys' dragons, probably Rhaegal. It's the only thing I can see. Like, I'm not sure how George is going to be able to kill off the dragons logically. Now, Rhaegal and then Viserion possibly could, like, end up killing each other type thing. Kind of how, like, Daemon Targaryen ends up dying when he does his fight in the Dance of the Dragons. Possibly we could see something like that, and then you would have just Daenerys with Drogon, and then you could have the war with the others, and all that goes on. So that would make a little bit more sense. But you see how much you have to think about how he can possibly make the story more compelling when it comes to Daenerys' story. Because Daenerys, in my opinion, is the hardest character to predict specifically what is going to happen with them, and two, the timing of everything. Because again, like I've said with Daenerys, is she going to come over when Cersei and the Lannisters are still in power? Or is she going to come over when Aegon is on the throne? So for me, I think it makes more sense if Aegon comes over, or is like already on the throne when she comes over. But then the next issue you have with her timing is, because it's going to take so long for Daenerys to come over to Westeros, assuming she gets there by the end of Winds of Winter, are the White Walkers already going to be on their advance, which I think they will be. I think they will probably be in the north by this point. I think Stannis is probably going to die at Winterfell, trying to delay them. So how does that work in A Dream of Spring? Is she going to try to get the throne first? Is she going to try to deal with the White Walkers first? Are Aegon and Daenerys going to make it back? There's so many things with Daenerys' character and or plot that it's very difficult. Because if we think about it like this, it would really be not a great payoff if we've been building up for 6 books, right? Because again, we don't expect Daenerys to be in Westeros until maybe the end of the 6th book. That she comes over, we've been building up this for 6 books where she's been raising the dragons, getting more armies, and growing smarter and all that stuff. For 6 books, just to come into the 7th book, and she doesn't even attack like King's Landing or anything. She doesn't go against Aegon. To me, it would feel kind of like, why was she here? Was she just here to fight the White Walkers? Which again, I think she's going to be very impactful in. But it's one of those things where it's like, how would you guys feel about Daenerys' character if she came over, she gives her life fighting the White Walkers, and that's it, right? We never get any payoff to her going for the Iron Throne. It's just she ends up dying fighting the White Walkers. Maybe this is because Jon has to sacrifice her. She gives her life saying, I will sacrifice myself to make this pact or whatever, right, happens. How would you guys feel about that? Would you guys feel like that's a good conclusion to her story? Or would you feel like, okay, but that wasn't really the overarching theme of her story? That was more of Jon's overarching theory where he gives his life against the White Walker threat. Because Daenerys, it very much feels like her character was building up towards the Iron Throne. And that's kind of been her main focus when it comes to Westeros for quite a while now. So, as you guys can tell, Daenerys is a very interesting subject. Because me, as someone that isn't the biggest Daenerys fan on the planet, even I see how many directions you can go with her story and how interesting she will be in the next few books. And that's something I think is very different for Daenerys, because to me, she's always felt like the side character. I mean, if you guys have ever read into the first book, Daenerys was not actually supposed to be in it. Daenerys was supposed to be kind of like another book that was going to be I guess a separate thing from a Game of Thrones, because that's kind of how Daenerys feels, right? Daenerys feels like not a side character, because she's definitely a main character, but her story feels so insignificant compared to the Westeros story going on. And that's going to eventually collide at the end of book 6 into book 7. So let me know what you guys think about what I talked about in this video. Do you think Daenerys is actually a bit more simpler? I'm just kind of making this a bit more, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what you guys are going to say, but let me know what you guys think. Is there other things that you guys think is kind of also leading to why George R. R. Martin is struggling with wins? I think if we're looking at just in the the story elements of it, I think this is one of the big reasons why. I think there's other things you can point to, which I've made videos on before, that I'm not going to touch in this one, because I personally don't want to make these videos where I constantly am maybe bashing George R. R. Martin. I want to make a video that's actually kind of thoughtful as to why he might be struggling writing it. And Daenerys is a big reason why, because I think a lot of other characters are kind of straightforward where they are going to go and all that. Like the northern plot, we know has to end with someone that is a good guy winning, kind of uniting the North. The White Walkers, one way or another, get through. every other, I feel like, plot, you know where it kind of has to go, right? More or less. But then you look at Daenerys and you're like, yeah, we have this overarching plot that we know she has to get to. There's so many side things going on that's going to take so long, in my opinion, to completely develop for her story to not feel rushed. So that is the end of the video. Thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.